overall sound groups must work together to create a musical composition that communicates eventually to your audience, because that's what you're trying to do. It's very easy to get caught up in the minutia, and I would really, really suggest that once you try it a few times and focus too heavily on things, you'll understand that you just can't do that. You have to just look at the basic overall picture. And one of the tricks that taught me that was when I first moved out to Los Angeles. I was working with Giorgio Moroder, who is a very famous producer, musician, writer. He did all of these movies in the 80s. He did Breakfast Club and Flashdance and Top Gun and all these movies that were done in his studio. He would write, and he would put down all these ideas, and he would set me up as an engineer, and he'd say, I'm going to dinner. I want 10 of those mixes on my desk when I get back. I'm like, you want 10 mixes in an hour while you're having dinner? He's like, yeah, you can do it. And he was very German, so he'd go, yes, of course. And then he'd drive off in his Lamborghini and go have dinner, and he'd come back, and he'd be like, where are my mixes? Where's the cassette? And I'd be like, I'm still on the first song. He'd like, too slow. So I almost got fired until I said, okay, I'm going to do it. So I just whipped through a mix, and I'd go, okay, can I hear the vocal? Can I hear the drums? Okay, done, next, and move on, so I could get enough done. And what it really taught me is I could actually do it quick like that, and I could actually nail the song to the point that I was really focusing on the most important elements and not overly focusing on, oh, is that guitar EQ'd perfectly? That doesn't matter, because it's the overall concept of what you get when you play the two tracks back together, not each individual sound. And nobody will hear the hi-hat soloed in your mix. See my point? It's really important. If you push yourself, give yourself a time limit, and say, I'm going to do the best job I can in an hour and do a mix. Then come back the next day and listen and evaluate. And go, wow, I could have done better. I see that I was a little imbalanced here and a little imbalanced there. And give yourself a few days and do it again. Give yourself an hour again. And pretty soon you'll train yourself to actually focus on the real important stuff and get something that actually sounds very close to a final product. One of the last things I want to say, I think that working quickly is sort of many engineers don't like to work quickly because, well, how do I put it this way? Okay, so in the 80s, I'd do a lot of mixing. We'd go into a major studio. We'd hire a studio for $1,200, $1,800 a day. We'd have a huge board with automation. I'd have every piece of outboard gear. I'd have the second engineer there. I'd have every piece of gear I wanted to rent, because we had huge budgets. And I would say and we'd take 2 days a mix. And I would say, at first, I would spend all 2 days trying to get a great mix. Then I realized, the more I do it, the worse I get. So I'm overstaying my welcome, and I'm passing the mix and missing it. And the mix is done when I feel like, intuitively, it feels like a final product. Sounds like a record. That's final. When I say it sounds like a record, the mix is over. It's like the painter that never knows when to stop, and keeps on messing it up. So, or the hairstylist that never knows where to stop. Well, it's, pretty soon you're bald. So the problem is that I'd go into these major studios, and they were expecting that this was an enormously difficult process, and it took enormous amounts of money to mix a song, because the studio itself cost $1,800 a day, plus all of the rental gears and all that stuff, and as a major artist. So I'd go in, and I'd spend about 3 hours getting a rough mix, and then we'd watch TV the rest of the day. And I say, you can't come in until the second day. It's going to take me at least that long to get it in order. And we'd have lunch and, smoke a cigarette, whatever. We'd just sort of, enjoy ourselves. And then we'd come in the next day. They'd show up and they'd go, wow, it's pretty close. Could we adjust this and that? Like, man, I worked really hard on that. And, it's a bit of a dog and pony show, but people feel as if they really want to get their money's worth, right? When in reality, a lot of it was just intuitively understanding the musicality of the music and just putting it together in what felt right, rather than every little detail. Because I don't even think that they heard all the details. And every time I tried to do every little detail and write every quarter decibel on this and that, and the other, it just was turned out to be so contrived sounding that it didn't sound musical at all, which is a real problem. General mixing concerns, right? So you have to be concerned about the sound spectrum of individual sounds and how they must work together to avoid frequency buildup and masking. So masking of one sound to another. If you've got a bass guitar and you've got a bass, a low end of a keyboard, you don't want those to mask each other. You want to be able to hear the definition in each. Sound position in the stereo field is really important. Methods of spectral building. There's a couple ways to blend sounds that actually work really well. There's two different approaches, and you can use either or a combination or anywhere in the middle. One side of the mixing spectrum blending aisle would be something like each sound has its own spectrum and it has its own balance of frequencies. So a kick drum has high frequencies and more low frequencies, but a cymbal has more high frequencies than low frequencies, but it has both. So you get well-balanced sounds, and then to blend those together is much more difficult than saying, okay, it's a cymbal, so it's supposed to be high frequency. So filter out all the low frequencies, get rid of them. And the kick drum is supposed to be low frequency, so filter out all the high frequencies and get rid of them. Basically, you assign each sound element to sort of a band of frequencies. Then they'll never really sort of conflict with each other. That's sort of a street way of hip-hop mixing, so to speak, whereas using every sound with a full spectrum and blending those is more of a pop songwriter kind of a way to mix. But both are very valid. I mean, you just don't want the frequencies in each sound to start covering up each sound so that you get all sorts of washiness between the sounds. You want to have distinction in all the different sounds. And I hope I'm not just departing my own taste on it, because that's sort of what I do best, is make sure that everything's heard and everything's defined, because I really like that. I like to be able to hear something in the sound picture, like if it was a visual picture, I would like to see it sharply. I don't want any blurriness. I want to make sure that I can see it sharply, all the details, and I like to hear all the details in a song. So that's sort of my personal taste. Not everybody has that taste, and I urge you to sort of approach the mixing process with a creative viewpoint. There's times when blurriness in sounds actually lends itself to the actual picture that you're trying to create, the mood you're trying to create. It's really about the ultimate mood and the song and how you can honor it best with the music. But that's two different approaches that people don't usually discuss, because there's times when I'll just go ahead and just severely filter sounds to put them in certain part of the spectrum, so that they don't conflict with each other. There's another way to do this as well, which I think I discuss a little more when we talk about music production, and that is deciding when things play. So if you've got two instruments with similar spectrums, they don't have to play at the same time. So deciding when they play versus how you're going to filter their spectrum so that they can fit together, right? Very important. While I'm on that subject, I used to work with a producer who was a drummer, and he did a lot of the early Madonna records. And the way that he would program, he'd step time program everything in the sequencer. And the way he would do it is he'd do it like a drummer would think. He has one sound that plays on these beats, another sound that plays on these beats, so he would basically set it up so that no instrument was playing when the other ones were, pretty much. So he'd have a lot of syncopation in his programming, but it was really easy to mix because I didn't have to worry about things shading and clouding and masking each other. They basically would never play at the same time. So there was plenty of space, sonic space that way too. So we'll talk about sonic space when it comes to production, but more on the mixing end. The sonic spectrum of building sound elements is extremely important in the mix. Sonic positioning, you've got left and right in panning. You've got front and back as well. Now that you know how sound behaves, how do you make a sound further away from you? How do you make a sound closer to you? Obviously, the closer to you the sound is, the more high frequency you'll be able to hear. Further away it is, the more it loses the high frequency in the traveling the distance to get to you. So the low frequencies have more energy, so those low frequencies will always reach you. So a sound that sounds duller, sounds further away, sounds that sound brighter, sound closer to you. And then you can always enhance that a little bit with a little reverb on the things that are further away and no reverb on the things that are closer. So you sort of have to recreate what it would actually sound like, and your brain actually perceives these things as further away and closer. And of course, something further away is going to be a little quieter and darker and reverbed, whereas something closer is going to be louder, brighter, and no reverb. So you've got sonic space forward and backward, left and right. You also have sonic space from low frequency to high frequency. The placement of individual sound elements, as I was mentioning, if you decide that your guitar player is only going to play on upbeats and the drummer is playing on downbeats, and nobody's playing in the same time positions, it's much easier to find the space for each element. But you can also decide that both guitar players don't have to play the same chord in the same inversion. So your arrangers in the room will be able to understand that one musician plays in first position, another musician plays in second or third position. They're in different parts of the spectrum, and it really helps to define them. There's a lot of ways to utilize the space that you have. Unfortunately, your sonic canvas is only so big. Everybody tries, or at least I used to try, to create more space than there really was. And the reality is, just like the room I'm standing in, you can only fit so many people in the room. You can't just overcrowd and overcrowd and overcrowd. So the party's great when there's enough people in here to make it a great party. When there's too many people, it's not a great party anymore.